Welcome to our session on technology. Do we lead it, or does it lead us? We're delighted to have you with us this afternoon, and we're very delighted to have Adam Roth with us. Adam will be our speaker. He is a 1998 graduate with an MSSA and an MNO. He is the founder and CEO of Streamlined Software. Streamlined Software. And you can read all about his background in the pamphlet that we got talking about today. Adam, as I said, was a founder of this company. He has about 15 years in the nonprofit sector. He worked at the Berea's Children's Home. He worked at the Diversity Center. And he, for about 10 years, was the chief operating officer for the Westside Ecumenical Ministry. The entrepreneurial bug then bit him really hard. And Adam founded Streamlined in 2008. And one of his major products is called Amplifund. During much of his career, he dealt with grants management and also coordinating and helping to manage board activities. So he created one program to really help in the grant-making area, and another one that has to do with helping to manage boards. We're very proud of Adam in terms of moving into this field, and he's become very important in helping to work with public officials, government officials, as we arrange and hopefully impact the development of regulations that impact us in technology. Now, I could go on, but you're going to read all about him in the booklet that I have, so we can save all of this time really listening to Adam. So, without further ado, here is Mr. Adam Roth.
Thanks, John. It's really great to be here. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to present today. I'm pretty positive that that what we're doing today is probably going to be different than almost any other session that you've done before, because we're going to try to build software today. So part of the process of what we're going to do is we're going to go through a set of exercises. We're going to look at how to build software. And the reason we're going to do that is because technology is advancing at a pace that is unbelievably fast. It is advancing very quickly. It has started to impact the social service industry, perhaps less so than other industries, but it's coming. And I think it's unbelievably important that us as a sector consider and have knowledge about how software is built, how it's made, what it does, so that you can better manage it. You can better think about how to incorporate it into your daily lives. You can think about how you can take advantage of it to improve your work with your clients, with your agencies, with your schools, whatever sector component that you're in. With that being said, one of the things that we're going to do right now is I want everybody to look around the room as I ask these questions. Number one, who here is in a direct service work with clients? Raise your hand. Okay. So I want everyone to look and see who those people are. Okay. All right. Who here is in an administrative role with clients, primarily? Administrative role with an agency. Who here works for an education organization? Okay. Have I missed anybody? Yes.
Private practice.
Private practice, so do you work directly with clients primarily? Okay, yes. So private practice, but it's a different perspective. Okay, the reason I'm asking these questions is I want you guys to all stand up, move around, and I want you to join with people that are in different industries than you at your tables. So we're going to break the comfort barrier right now. Everybody stand up. Find a new place to sit, meet some new people. This is an alumni event after all. Let's mingle. No cocktails yet, but that doesn't mean we can not talk to one another.
Are we taking our stuff with us?
Take your stuff with you. And we probably need, try to get in groups of 4 or 5. You know, I don't want 2 people at a table. Try to make sure you've got a good mix of folks. All right, how are we doing? Are we working it out? Does anyone need any help? Is anyone? I only see 2 people at this table. Maybe we could put 2 tables together. Maybe you guys could mix with that table over there, because I want to have a little bit bigger group. Or is more people coming? All right, never mind. Let's get them. No. Let's mix. I want more people at a table. So why don't you guys come on over here? There's a couple people need to go over to that table over there. See if that's a good mixed group for you. All right. All right. All right. Are we good? All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I know that's a little awkward, a little uncomfortable, but we are in social work school. Push those boundaries, push those barriers a little bit, right? So, yeah. So we're moving things along in a good way. What I would like everybody to do is I'm going to show a short video here. This just talks about this. The name of this video is called "Shift Happens." So, the purpose of that presentation, besides providing you with a lot of really cool facts that you can go home and talk to your family about later on tonight, is to set the stage. It's to create the framework for today's conversation. And it is a conversation. I want this to be interactive. We're going to be working together, hopefully laughing a little bit together. I got some stories that I think are funny. Even if you don't, I appreciate the courtesy laugh along the way. That will be helpful. And as we talk about this, I think it's important that we consider some sort of core elements that are happening, right? Presentation noted, for example, that the amount of content that was generated last year exceeded the previous 5,000 years of content combined. It's an amazing amount of information that's accessible to our clients, to ourselves, to everything. And all of this information and content that's out there is starting to become accessible as data, whether it's written content, images, numbers, it doesn't matter. And with the way the world is moving, and what we'll talk about towards the end of today, is how all of that data is now able to inform systems in a way that never was possible before. And I know that that's kind of out there, so we're going to kind of back it up for a second, and we're going to talk a little bit about technology and nonprofits. Now, I spent 15 years in the nonprofit sector, completely passionate about the sector. I think it's a fantastic sector. And then I moved, and like most good nonprofit executives, I started a software company. And from that experience, I can tell you that this is kind of how most of the world thinks in terms of technology in the nonprofit sector. It's a square peg in a round hole. And if you Google square peg in a round hole, you actually get this image. It does look a bit rectangular, but I think it's just because of the angle. So when you have, but why is this? Why is the idea that technology and nonprofits, because I built the company selling technology to nonprofits, why is this idea that nonprofits and technology are sort of oil and water, square peg, round hole? Why can't those things fit together?
Well, I worked with many people in the social work field, and I found that many times they're wonderful at talking with other people, helping them to solve different issues on a personal level. But many times they don't know basics of technology. And it's like, for me, I found myself being kind of like sometimes at odds with that, because I found that, to me, I'm building on everything that I learned. And I was like 30 years old when I built my computer, and I realized, hey, it's very simple. All I have to do is just buy components, spend 40 minutes, and I can just, build computer from those components. It's that easy. And I was surprised when some people look at me when I described it to them, and they were like, wow, you did what? To me, it was surprising, because I thought, yes, but it's so simple.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think there could be definitely a fear or sort of a anxiety towards technology. I also think there's an infrastructure challenge that nonprofits have that for-profit companies don't have. I'm going to steal this real quick for a second, if I could. Prop. So if Swad buys this lovely bottle of Tropicana cranberry juice, and she pays Tropicana $1 for this, do you tell them where this money goes? Do you tell them, look, I know you guys do lots of great work, but I really want this money to go into researching better cranberries so I can get better cranberry juice? When you buy it? No, right? But when you get a donation or a contribution or a grant as a nonprofit, isn't that exactly what happens? They say, okay, here's $1 million, and you're like, great, and then they say, well, you only could buy balloons with it. And you're like, oh, well, that's not really what I wanted, but let me consider it, okay? So the challenge that nonprofits have, one of the biggest challenges that nonprofits have structurally, is that historically, you are limited in terms of when the money comes in, where it goes. And even if they don't tell you where they want it to go, you have audits, right? You've got year-end financial statements. And how does those financial statements look when 50% of your budget's going to administration? Donors happy, not happy? Not happy, right? So when you have a budget, let's say you run an organization, it's $10 million a year. It's a substantial organization in the nonprofit sector. $10 million a year basically means you're spending $10 million a year because you're not making a profit, sort of almost by definition. Now maybe you might make a small one, but in this example, there's no profits. It's $10 million a year. And in that organization, you get to spend 15% of it on administration. So that means you're spending $8.5 million on programs and services and operations, and you're doing all of this great work because you're a nonprofit, and that's what you do, and it's fantastic. It's wonderful. But at the end of the day, you only have $1.5 million to spend on administration. Of course, to spend $8.5 million, you probably have 200 employees. So you probably need what? HR department, you probably need a finance department, probably have to have a building, right, somewhere, facilities, all this kind of stuff. So you break this all down, and your $1.5 million, by the time you're done, you have $150,000 a year to spend on IT. Now, if you have a for-profit company that spends $10 million a year, they don't make $10 million, they probably make $40 million, but they spend $10 million a year. How much of that $10 million do you think is spent on IT? $2 million a year, $2 to $3 million on IT, annual spend. So they're spending more on IT than you can spend on all of your administration combined. So structurally, can nonprofits spend as much on technology as for-profits? No. So structurally, we're behind the curve, right? So structurally, historically, nonprofits have been behind the curve when it comes to technology. And one of the challenges in that perspective is that it's not that nonprofits don't want technology. It's not that there isn't this desire to get more efficient, to get more effective, to get more information, to get more data, to understand their businesses better, to move information better. All of that stuff is true. In fact, what I would argue is that I have never seen a sector that is more entrepreneurial than the nonprofit sector. Nonprofits have to reinvent themselves every single year. How many people have written a grant before, been involved in a grant, have run a program that was related to a grant, have ever heard of a grant, right? Okay, how many people have gone to a foundation and said, I want money for this program? Okay, those people that have, what's one question that the foundation wants to know at the end? Yes, and yes. How are you going to sustain it? So, meaning what? You're not going to give me the grant again next year? So what do you have to come back to the foundation with next year? A new program. Every year, you have to reinvent your program. So you have programs start in year one, you have another program that starts in year two. It's kind of the same program, you're serving the same people, but you got to reinvent it every year because it's the only way you can pay for it, right? So the reality is nonprofits are constantly reinventing themselves. How many audiences does a typical nonprofit have to sell to? If I buy this Tropicana, so I'll steal you as an example again. Tropicana is selling this, well actually they're selling this to Case, right? They're saying Case Western really loves Tropicana cranberry. And so we're going to sell case loads of this for their alumni events, okay? And they sell it, Case buys it, sold it to one customer. If you're a nonprofit and you want to give this Tropicana to someone who needs it, right? Who pays for it? Someone else, right? Now you got to sell this thing twice. You got to sell it to the person that needs it. You got to find the person. You got to identify them. You got to find a way to give it to them. You got to identify them. You got to market it to them so that they know to come and get that because they need it. But just because they need it doesn't mean they're going to get it. So you got to do all that stuff. Then on the flip side, you got to step back and say, all right, John, you're rich. Pay for it. And John's a great guy, so he takes out his wallet and he writes you a check. But you had to do both, right? So nonprofits, honestly, the people that work in nonprofits are unbelievably entrepreneurial. Technology is typically synonymous with entrepreneurship. Building tech companies, building tech businesses, building tech ideas. the thinking, the process, the ideas, all of that exist in your nonprofits today. So I agree, some folks are going to have anxiety about it. But I think organizationally, people in general will embrace it. They'll embrace change. Nobody changes more than a nonprofit. Nobody has to convince more people what to do than a nonprofit. The challenge is, structurally, it's very hard to afford it. So when we look at technology and kind of where it's going, when you look at sort of what's happened to it, the structure of technology has changed. When I started Streamlined in 2008, the idea of doing web-based software, which is a type of software that exists in the cloud, if I say those words, am I making sense or am I not making sense? Web-based software cloud, are we good? Or I just want to make sure definitions were on the same page. Okay, so if I'm making web-based software that's in the cloud, what does that mean? It means that it costs you, the nonprofit, to run my software less money than it used to cost you. Because if I sold you a board management software that costs you $5,000 a year, you used to have to pay $5,000 to the company that sold you the software, and then you have to pay $30,000 a year for part of a technology person to run it, make sure the security was up, to run the servers, to manage all of that. Web-based technology takes all that burden off the nonprofit, so all of a sudden, different types of technology are accessible. And when we look at this over time, you have historical systems. Most nonprofits have some kind of financial accounting system, whether it's QuickBooks or Blackbaud Financial Edge. They've got some kind of financial accounting system. Most nonprofits that deal with donors have some kind of donor management system, whether it's Razor's Edge or Donor Perfect or whatever that structure is. And then you may have client records or enrollments, and those were the traditional systems. And those systems all have the same fundamental concepts, which is they were storage and retrieval systems. They were systems that allowed you to store information and pull it back out. Now, you could pull it out in a different format. You could run a report and see things in a different way. Maybe you could run a batch of letters to send back to your donors. Again, that's a report just in a different format. But it basically put information in, same person, maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe a team of people, get that information out, but they're storage and retrieval. And the reason for this is that the level of expectation on nonprofits, as that pressure has continued to grow, management and communication tools become more important. And so what we've seen in the sector is a movement beyond storage and retrieval systems into more management systems. Someone earlier, when I asked about foundations, mentioned outcomes. So there's systems now that help you track outcomes. Why do you have that? Because the expectation of the donors has changed. Why do you have board systems? Because you need to understand fiduciary responsibilities in new ways, and board members have different levels of expectation based on everything else that's going on in their lives. Remember, shift happens. The world shifted. All of these people have shifted. They're all on Facebook every day. They don't expect to get their handwritten board packet anymore. They expect to get an electronic board packet. They expect to get information in a different way. The communications have changed. The expectations of our audience has changed. And whether it's any one of these systems, they're all management systems. And what's the difference between a management system and a storage and retrieval system? A management system fundamentally is, in almost every one of these cases, is a transportation system. So when we talk about a management system, and when you are implementing a system in your agency, whatever system that might be, if it's a management system, it is a transportation system. What are we transporting?
Data.
What?
Data, knowledge.
Data, knowledge, data. Right, data. Data is at the heart of it. And data and ultimately the movement of data is what all of these systems are about. It's just different types of data. It's outcomes, it's grant data, it's tracking where my vehicles are going. All of those things exist to give you more access to data and information. And as that level of data, remember the amount of information that's available today is more than the 5,000 years previous, it's because of this. All of this stuff is driving data and it's driving content. And the ability of systems today to move and manage and have access to data, whether it's publicly accessible or not, is a significant change in how things move. So I want to take just a couple minutes to talk a little bit about how to build software. So when we build software, we usually have to define a problem. Software is usually created to solve a problem. And whether it's a referral system, or whether it's a board management system, or whether it's a grants management system, the core concept of it is we're trying to solve a problem. So when we look at grants, for example, we talked a little bit about the type of money that it is. Most of you guys are familiar with that. You've got all different kinds of people receiving grants. And the reason I'm providing this is what our company builds. So I just kind of quickly go through an example. This will just be a minute. Go through an example of what it is, the thing that we're trying to solve. And then when we translate it to your situations, you'll have some concept of how to sort of think through this. So looking at the different types of institutions that are related, all the different people that are involved. So when you're building software, one of the things you need to think about is, who are all the people that are going to touch it? It's transportation. Who is everyone that needs to get it? When do they need to get it? How does it have to happen? How do we move in that direction? You've got all different kinds of folks that are looking at managing this money from the government. Anybody know how much federal grants go out every year? Any idea? What? Or no, the entire federal government. How much federal grant making happens annually? $650 billion a year in federal grant making. Not counting disaster relief funding, which will soon be going to Texas and Florida and Puerto Rico, hopefully. So $650 billion a year. The amount of money that the federal government gives away in grants to state and local governments represents 5% of our country's entire gross domestic product. So when you talk about managing a system, when we talk about managing, in our case, federal money, the problem we're solving is trying to figure out how to better manage 5% of the country's GDP. And we want to do it by streamlining that, creating better ecosystems, better management of information, so that the information is communicated more in a standard way. So there's more standardization and reporting for recipients and subrecipients and grants alike. We want to be able to manage the full cycle of the grant in that process. So these are all the different elements that we have to consider when we're thinking about it. And we'll talk a little bit more about identifying funding a little later, and how we're working on building out something related to that now and how that fits into this picture. But you can kind of manage through that process. The phases of a grant. So, we've got the cycle, and then you've got all these different elements and things that need to happen at each step of the cycle as we go through it. And we won't go through too much of this here. Then we've got compliance. You not only have to manage all this money, but you have to comply with new legislation and new policies and new laws, and all of that puts pressure, and you have those things putting pressure on you in lots of different areas, not just grants, but you have those pressures on you every day. You have accreditation, you have licensure, you have service requirements, you have United Way requirements, you have funder requirements, you have all of these different pressures that all of these things decrease your ability to do your job well and are potentially opportunities for you to solve with technology. And these are just a set of compliance issues that we looked at as it relates to that. So why a grants management tool? These are the things that we identified as sort of the core of what the value creation we could have is. And then you get to a solution statement. And before you build a product, before you think about developing a new thing, we want to come up with a solution statement. We want you today in your groups to come up with a solution statement for your problem. It's not a problem statement. A problem statement tells me what the problem is. A solution statement tells me what the solution will be. And we want to come up with a solution statement. This is the one for grants, for example, in your groups. Why do you think we put different kinds of people together in these groups? Different backgrounds, different perspectives, right? The different perspectives because the value that we have in the system could be very different depending on what side of the table you're sitting on. When we talk to a person in the grants world, for example, we talk to a grants manager, they're worried about getting reminders out, getting grant reports out, et cetera. When I talk to the head of a state agency, they're interested in how do I make sure I draw down every grant dollar I have and I meet the federal compliance requirements. Different value statements. So as you think about putting systems together, that becomes important moving on. So, yes. So before we dive into thinking about how do we build better transportation, data systems related to your businesses, what kind of data do you take in? And we do have Leah who will help us with the flip chart.
Which is very non-technical.
Yeah, so this,
We're going to pretend it's digital. See?
yeah, yes, it needs ironed as well. So, so it, so shift happens, shift doesn't happen. So, so we have a process here though. So I just want you to give us data. What kinds of things do you think about, whether you're with a patient, whether you're with your agency, when you're thinking about your day, what elements, what things, what pieces of information are important to you to do your job? And go.
Client demographics.
Okay, here's what I want to do. Raising hands is good. That's what you've been taught. It's very structured. Unstructure it, just shout them out. Go, and if I...
You can't hear people.
What you said?
If they're talking that way, we can't hear back here.
Nobody's ever said they couldn't hear me.
Yeah, I hear you.
Client demographics.
Oh, the people down here. Oh, I got you. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I will. Sorry. Good point. Client demographics. I was not following it. Now I'm on board. We're like this now. No, because it's too slow. Client demographics. What else? Maybe it's not too slow.
Diagnosis.
What?
Mental health diagnosis.
Diagnosis. MH diagnosis. What else?
Contributions.
Contributions.
Reimbursement.
It's reimbursement.
Outcomes.
Outcomes.
Expenses.
Expenses.
Boy, you guys are fast.
Productivity.
Productivity.
Case studies.
Budget. Okay, we're gonna take a break.
I think I missed a few.
Expenses.
Okay.
Regulations.
Regulations.
And compliance.
Compliance.
And case notes.
Case notes. Oh, I feel the energy, it's building.
Ratio of expenditures management to clients.
Ratio, expenses managed to clients. So ROI, performance data.
Compliance.
Compliance, I think we got that.
We got that.
Yep. It's all right, you don't lose points for that, it's good. Just keep them coming. Measurement. Evaluation. Okay.
Cost effectiveness.
Cost effectiveness.
Plan
Plan, like strategic plan, operation,
for client.
plan for the client, individual client plan.
Staffing.
Staffing,
Evidence-based.
evidence-based,
Company structure.
company structure,
Nobody mentioned technology.
technology. What other kinds of data points do we want? What other kinds of data helps you do your job every day?
Family history.
Family history.
Isn't that part of demographics?
Yeah, so demographics probably takes a big chunk of that. So family history, right, you know, all that we can throw under there, but it's a good identifier, good pull out.
Demographics.
Not demographics?
No, so it's clinical. You want to know the clinical things about.
Okay, all right, so family history, clinical, okay, fair enough.
Medical should be done there too.
Medical?
Schedules.
Schedules. Who works for you? Who worked in education? Enrollment, big deal. Anything else?
I can't think of a one word, but it's client appointment schedule versus.
Okay, scheduling. Scheduling?
Schedules is on here.
Schedules, okay.
Yeah.
Correspondence.
Correspondence? How about referrals? I look at Providence House because I've talked to Natalie. Oh, I know you guys are busy. Partnerships?
Follow-up contact after they're out of service.
Follow-up okay. Follow-up contacts. So client communication, follow-up contacts.
Contracts.
Contracts. All right, so yeah, we have really no good way of doing this, do we?
Yeah.
All right, contracts, we'll just try to remember, and then we'll put them up at the end. Contracts. Outreach. All right, that's not an exhaustive list, but it's a great list. Give you guys a round of applause. That was fantastic. All right, so what we want to do now is in your teams, and I'm sorry, you came in late, so you're punished and sit in the corner. So you just need to, so you got to find a table with a few more people because you don't want to do this by yourself. So what we want to do is in your teams, find a data point or multiple data points that you want to think about solving for with a solution that you don't have today. Or you might have one today and you think it's shift. So you want to make sure that you've got that ready to go. So, okay, you might have one, you need a new one, you don't have one, you think you could do it better. Think of some data points, think about how you want to manage those. Which data points do you want to think about managing in a system? You don't have to figure out right now how you're going to solve it. All I want is the solution statement for how it will be once it's solved. Okay? Think about the data points, think about the problem, think about where the problem is, and then think about what you're going to come up with at the end. Get in your groups. This is where I take a break. You guys do a little bit of work. If you have any questions before we start. All right, I seem to have explained things well enough. All right, let's go. We got 15 minutes. We'll crank through this. So you have some time. You don't have to like rush to come up with one. Bounce some ideas off of each other. Some people are still maybe trickling in, but I want to be respectful of everybody else's time, so we're going to keep the ball rolling. What we're going to do now is we're going to do the report outs from the group. I'm interested in hearing. You don't have to give me everything you talked about. I'm just interested in hearing. Actually, before we do that, is this a different way of thinking than how you usually think about things? Has this changed a little bit about how you think about solving the problems, or is it kind of the same way, but maybe with a little more structure, or is it just kind of what you do anyway? I think different people think differently, so I'm just interested in that. Any reactions?
I'd say it's that you think more about the process, how everything all goes together.
Yeah, it makes you think more about.
About what other people do besides yourself.
Okay. Okay, any other thoughts?
I love forcing us to start with the solution. Because as much as we like to be strengths-based in social work, it's easy to get bogged down by the problems and not turn it on its end and say, what do I want?
Right, okay.
There used to be a class, at least when I was at SEST 40 years ago, called PPP. And it's problem, policy, and program. And so this relates to that very nicely.
So it relates to the problem, policy, program kind of way to think about things? Okay, that's great. I wanted, I mean, one of the goals of today is to give you some tools, hopefully we have some fun, but also to give you some tools to think about how I can apply this to my agency, how I can apply this to my world. I also wanted you to start to think about how software developers and how software people think so that you can better manage them. You think about like your clients, right? If you know their ecosystem, you know their worldview, you know where they're coming from, you understand the pressures and the pains that are surrounding them and how they're thinking about the problem, that helps you do your job better. It's the same thing here in terms of understanding the process, understanding what they want, and also giving you tools to not only understand the process, but if you're involved in it at any level, a stakeholder, a manager, whatever, you need to be able to drive the process in the direction that you want it to go. Too often we see software projects that go on a hill to die because they just aren't managed correctly. And I want to make sure, given that technology is going to be coming more and more into your space, I want to make sure that you have the tools to do that. And with that, I'd love to hear who wants to go first. Overachieving group always goes first over here.
Okay, so the problem we discussed about is mainly how to better manage the program that is both beneficial to the donors and also to the grantees as well. Because sometimes, most of the times, we develop those kind of tracking or monitoring templates, but it creates troubles for the grantees to report and also for donors as well, because you need to constantly update or consolidate all those separate reports together. So by creating this digital platform that allow both donors and the grantees can access and to ensure the life cycle of the program can be, the data around the life cycle of the program can be entry to the to this digital platform, from the program planning to program implementation, management, measurement, and not just to manage the program itself, but also through the platform to accelerate collaborations among all partners and be able to allow them to share informations and to promote collaborations.
Okay. Was there anything specifically as you were looking at this around the data flow? Were there any really hard challenges that you saw in terms of that data flow? Or did you feel like creating that single platform for access and sharing information, that solved a lot of the data flow problems? Or did you not get to that at all, which is totally okay?
I think it mainly for the tracking process, because a lot of things need to first discuss and align in terms of setting up the measurement indicators and the program plan itself, and also the budgets. So once we have all those information aligned, we can put them into this digital platform, and then also be able to ask our grantees to update on a regular basis. That is beneficial for both donor and partners.
Cool, thanks. Anybody else? Love to hear more about your discussions, yeah.
So our success measure, what we're looking at is the percentage of clients gaining employment from each of the training programs that we're looking at. Our user will be the workforce development, program developers, contract analysts, supervisors, the director of the agency, and county council. The data we'll be looking at is basically clients' information on basic demographics, whether or not they have some form of education, previous employment history, any other training. And then the program data, we looked at name, the accessibility to transportation, program demands and requirements for skills taught at the different programs. And the outcomes will be the completion of the programs, attaining employment, the retention of employment.
Okay. Cool. Very great. Thank you. Anyone else? There's 3 left. All right. All right.
Anyone else, as if it's an option.
All right. I mean, yeah.
Okay, so we were going on with our thing about protecting the health information.
Right.
And so we said that our users would be the therapists, but this is a clinic setting, so there would be physicians and nurses that would have access, and that as far as encrypting the information, that would be if you sent any emails or information out to outside agencies, then there would be keywords that would cause the system to show that something needed to be encrypted, and that could have that may have to do with like substance abuse information. It might have to do with adult protective information.
Sure.
It could be various different things of that nature. And then to check on the success, it would be having the therapist give feedback as to how the system's working, what's working for them, what isn't working. And then there could be other aspects of it too. There could be aspects that have to do with research and knowing client populations that you're working with, like the refugee populations and things of that nature.
Great. Thank you. Okay, there's 2 left. Flip a coin. All right.
Well, we were kind of at a loss as to how to approach this, since we're not very technologically savvy.
Sure.
We were talking about scheduling and productivity, and of course, the user would be the agency, anyone working at the agency, the therapists, the administrators. But what we thought is we would need to research and find a system that worked to track, the right kind of software to track that data that we wanted. So we would either look for the system or hire a computer programmer to be able to do it.
And if you hired a computer programmer to do it, if we think about it, sort of how do you see the data moving between those different users within the system? So if you're managing the scheduling, like if I'm a client and I'm coming in, how do I use that system? How would you see me accessing it? Is it through a website? Is it through kind of that thought? Do you guys think about that at all?
No.
No?
Really.
Okay. All right. That's all right. So those are some of the questions that, as you start to think about how you would then want to engage that contractor, those are the kinds of questions you would want to have the answers to, and not just let the contractor define that for you, because they don't know your population. So before you engage that contractor, not that you're building it, but you would want to have the answers to those kinds of questions, right? Because you would want to know how, almost fell over, you'd want to know how that data would flow and move through that system and process. Because if you leave it up to them, chances are they're going to get it wrong, right? So make sure, as you start to think about it, that's what we want these use cases for, and it's fine. I appreciate the effort. As we go through the use cases, these are things you would want to have built before you engage a developer. You would want these things done above that blue line before you start to engage a developer, because they shouldn't define those for you. Those are things you should define for them. Okay? All right. Last group.
We're also at a loss. We're going to call Mr. Mata Hor, and we're going to switch to the MVR program, a lot of Advil, and we're going to call Streamlined.
It's all right. All right. That's fine. Okay, so, all right. So the idea, right, is, yeah, so unfortunately we don't do that, but I would be happy to help you if you were trying to do that. We don't build custom solutions. We just have products that we sell. But from that perspective, I certainly appreciate the effort. We can just kind of not deal with that. So these are another set of questions when you engage a contractor or someone to come in to develop a software, or you're going to buy a software. These are things that you need to think about. First thing you should think about probably is, do you want this to be web-based or do you want to install it? Why is that important to think about first? Is because if it's something you're going to install, it means it's something you're going to have to manage and run. Okay? So you have to decide whether it's your people, your infrastructure, your investment in that technology that's going to manage and run it, or you're going to buy it and pay a subscription every year, but you don't have to run it. The reality is, in almost every case, a subscription is cheaper, but it is cash out the door. If you have people that have lots of free time in your organizations, as all nonprofits do, they got people sitting around doing nothing, right? Then that's, maybe that's an option, just something to think about. We talked about earlier how that SaaS solutions, the web-based solutions, allowed nonprofits to start to buy software when they couldn't before. Understand how much of this system you're buying is commercially off the shelf. That means it's pre-built. It's something that exists already. They're not programming it for you. It's already done. Then there's two types of things that can happen from there. One is the term configuration, and one is the term customization. Who knows what the difference is? Anyone? Yeah?
Yes, so configuration would be changes within a program that were already created when program was created. So say, like, for example, if we have MS Word, for example, when I'm doing configuration, I may be saying, okay, I will use, I will use, let's say, Times New Roman as a font. Right. So that's that's an example of configuration.
Okay, yeah.
And customization will be, let's say, I have program that in general kind of like have some big parts of it which already in place, but then some pieces of it might be changed just for my individual needs. I hope I kind of like describe it good enough.
Right. You're basically right. Configuration is something where you don't need to change the code of the system, basically. The code of the system exists. It allows you, through the interface of the system, you could potentially build a workflow, you could create fields, you could update what types of demographics you wanted to capture, you could do all of that, and you don't need anyone to go behind the scenes in a developer and code those changes. Customization requires development time to go behind the scenes to change that. The cost differential between the two is massive. Systems that are basically off the shelf and require configuration versus a system where a developer comes in and says, we're going to custom build that for you, the cost differential is very, very significant. In so much as, in fact, our company, we have a product we sell. We don't customize our product for anybody. We'll configure it for everybody, but we don't customize it for anybody. We only customize based on the market as a whole, not any one customer. So we have one code base, one product. If John comes to me and says, I need the system to do this, this, and this, and that's not something that we do, answer is no. Now the difference is, John wants to get that done. He could go pay someone to build that. The cost differential between him paying someone to get that small amount of increase of functionality in the product versus buying an off-the-shelf product with a certain amount of configuration is going to be very significant. So understand that if you buy an off-the-shelf product with configuration, you're probably not going to get everything you want. The difference is you're not going to own the code because it's not just your code, it's a code that's owned by everybody, lots of users, and the cost structure is going to be a lot different. Remember that last screen we were on that had all the different things that you want for how they're going to build the system, how they're going to work on it, how it's going to get developed, how does things work, all that stuff. Make sure you understand that. Make sure you understand your staff need to implement the system. This is an area where this is underestimated constantly from organizations. It takes effort, even if it's just configuration. It's going to take project management expertise. It may take some systems expertise. It may take other forms of expertise that you may or may not have on staff. You need to identify that ahead of time so that you can work with a company that's providing you the technology to either fill those gaps for you in the process, or you need to find another way to accomplish that. Check the references. It's more important, I don't know if it's a fair statement. I believe it's more important that you get references on the company's ability to service their clients than it is on the quality of the software. Especially if you're going down the road of a SaaS or a web-based solution, because that product will constantly be changing and developed and updated and everything else. And if the company is providing good service, meaning they are constantly updating, improving, and changing it, it's more important that you're buying. I'd rather buy an 80% good product with a really great service company than a 90% good product with a really bad service company, because I'm going to get over my 90% mark a lot faster with that first option. Just something to think about. One of the things that you have to recognize, this is going to be hard for most people, is our whole lives we're told we're unique. Our whole lives we're told we're special. Our whole lives, especially once we get into the nonprofit world, we do things that nobody else does. Our mission is our mission, and it's it. We're it. We serve them. It's great, but you're not really. I mean, at the end of the day, unique equals money in the software world. If you insist on being unique, you're going to need to customize. Time to join the crowd. Peer pressure. Become one of the lemmings. All those things you were told not to do, if you can find a way to do it, it will speed up your development, it will decrease your cost, and it will make it much more likely that you will be successful than if you have to be unique. Because unique means I got to get 100% right. If you can live with 85 or 90, you're going to be a long way there to being successful. It's interesting. If you were to guess the types of performance data required for the federal government on all of the different grants the federal government gives out, all the different kinds of money they give out, what the number of performance data types there are on every one of that $650 billion, what would your guess of numbers be? Anybody? Shout it out.
500.
500. Anything? Anybody else? Any ideas? 6. I can track every data element on every federal grant that's been produced in the last 10 years using our system through 6 types of data elements. Unit data, percentage changed, percentage achieved, narrative, accomplished or not accomplished, reimbursement. Those 6 types of data allow me to track every kind of unit. I can track obesity rates, I can track teen scores, I can track houses built, I can track people served, I can track employment data, I can track data statistics, every one of them. So yes, you're unique, but I can track every one of your performance data just by having 6 data elements that I can track in my system. Now, I can call them all different things. That's the configuration. But I don't have to customize what I am collecting. So performance data and outcomes isn't that hard to track, not at a data level. at a label level, what you call it, how you measure it, those things are a little more challenging. But at a data level, at a systems level, those things aren't really that difficult of a problem for you guys to solve as you think about this stuff going forward. Any questions on that? Ready to move on? We're going to go to the future. Right. So we have talked about management. We didn't really actually spend very much time talking about database stuff because that's kind of boring. We talked a lot about management systems, much more fun and exciting. Moving data, transporting that data, connecting data points between different elements, giving people information that they need that they don't have today. But what goes beyond this? What changes? Who's ever heard of blockchain? Raise your hand. A couple people. I'm actually impressed. Who's ever heard of communication tools? Almost everybody should know that. iPhones, et cetera. Who's ever heard of artificial intelligence? All right. So out of all of these things, your original idea, your solution statement came the closest to blockchain of anything we talked about. We're going to spend probably 30 seconds, 45 seconds on blockchain. Blockchain basically today is what's used to manage the cryptocurrency stuff like Bitcoin and things like that. Basically, it's a series of registered entities, linked entities, blocks that are connected by chains that exist to push data through structured data sets managed by third-party approvals that create results that are locked down. So think about doing an audit. If you had to do an audit and you needed financial data that was put in a system and then locked and couldn't be changed, that was pre-approved by a third-party vendor, and then you would have, it's also public. At the end of the day, there's public visibility of it. So if you're the federal government and you have all of this data and all these data elements and you're wanting to figure out how do you provide public transparency to it, blockchain has some interest in connections and building out that structure. What you talked about before, about this idea that you have one sort of structured data set that potentially everything could tie into, there's potentially some value out of this that could fly into that, but there's other ways to do that today. But this is an interesting model in terms of where things go. Pretty much every meeting that we have on the innovation side with the federal government, blockchain is brought up. Pretty much none of our customers ever know anything about blockchain. So it doesn't have a lot of practical applications today. There was just a partnership announced between a number of banks that are using blockchain to, instead of wire transactions, they're thinking about using blockchain technology to manage the transfer of funds and assets between different financial institutions as a structured component that would potentially have visibility on it. So it's an interesting concept. We'll have to see where it goes, but I did want to bring it up because it is probably one of the key things that's talked about today, and I wanted to make sure that at least was on your radar screen. Who's seen any of these things before? Okay. All right, so this is actually the part of the conversation which is interesting to me. So before I did this presentation, because I've never done this presentation before, this is like the first time I've ever presented this material. So you guys are the guinea pigs, so thank you for being such a great, friendly audience, laughing at all my jokes and doing all that. So with this component here, I did some research. So I looked up, because I figured I'm presenting at a university, I better actually research my topic a little bit. So I did a little bit of research, and what I learned was, and I don't know if anybody here has heard of this or they talk about it, I learned that there's this new sort of way to use communication tools in cognitive therapy. So that there's actually therapy now that's happening via the internet. Therapy that's happening via different social media. Now, I read this and I was like, oh, I wonder if that works. So then I did some more research and I dug in and I read some journal articles because I was taught by Mr. John Yankee over there that I needed good primary source data. And I identified in those journal articles that the difference between the results of face-to-face therapy and therapy over some kind of advanced communication tool was basically the same. Now, I'm just the messenger. I'm not saying that that's right, but it did identify some things why this type of therapy would be better, and it did identify some things why it might not be as good. It's harder potentially to build a deep personal relationship over advanced communication tools, but it's a lot easier to get the person to come to therapy. It's maybe a little bit harder to understand body language and understand nonverbal cues in an advanced communication environment, but maybe there's less of a stigma to the individual going through a site and doing therapy versus walking into a therapist's office. There's, interestingly enough, there's the fact that the folks surveyed came from all different populations, income status, and almost all of them had access to advanced communication tools. Didn't matter if they were poor or rich, they had access to advanced communication tools. And this is how the majority of people communicate today. They don't talk to people. They don't talk on the phone. They're more comfortable talking through this or communicating through this. And if you want to get people at their most comfortable today, this is another way to think about it. So I wasn't actually I had no idea I was going to present on this until I started researching and finding things. So I learned about this. So I only bring it up, I'm not an expert on it at all, but I did want to bring it up because it was one area where I saw sort of technology directly impacting direct practice in social work going forward right now, potentially having that impact. So just something to think about. I don't know if there's any comment. Have anyone ever seen therapy done this way? On Skype? How does it work? Do you think the results are?
Excellent. Skype therapy, when you already have an existing relationship with someone, but you move and you want to keep that relationship going. So there was some kind of in-person meeting to start.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then it can be continued.
All right, that's cool. Anybody else have any other experiences with it? So something to keep a lookout for. If you're at the school, if you're at MSSA, you're in the faculty or advisor or whatever, something to think about maybe getting more tied into, because it does seem to be moving in this direction. And I can just tell you with the way the population is going, having 4 children myself and having 3 teenage girls out of those 4 children, the reality is this is their world in a lot of ways. And we certainly work hard in our family not to let this be their whole world, but for a lot of people, this is their whole world. And so we need to reach people where they're at. This is an option to think about going forward. Okay. Artificial intelligence. Who's heard of artificial intelligence again? A lot of people, right? Who knows what who can define artificial intelligence or tell me what it is? One person, all right? Go for it. I've given you 4 bullets up here, so you could just read those and you'd all win, but just...
It's, again, I'm not specialist in it, so it's kind of like I'm trying to use common sense and my understanding of it. So it's an approach which tries to emulate as closest as possible the way your common human thinks about different objects, process information, and then maybe communicates something about whatever it could be. So, for example, with artificial intelligence, today it's possible to pick up a phone, call a company, and using natural language processing software, you might speak with a system which will tell you, hello, my name is such and such. I'm your automated system, but I can understand your usual common human language. So tell me the reason of your calling. And that might ask you, tell me, for example, your date of birth. or tell me your first and last name, or your social security number, and so on, so on, so on.
Yep, no,
It's kind of like, that's the way how I understand it.
So absolutely. So the natural language processing is absolutely a key element of it. The other parts of it involve the other parts of it actually involve being able to read and understand unstructured data. So the ability to actually learn from papers, PDFs, documents, the like. We have a business partnership, so it's a little plug here in terms of disclosure. We have a business partnership with IBM. So IBM has a product called Watson. You may have seen it on TV. And Watson, the idea behind it is that, and one of the ways we use Watson, or we will be using Watson, is the federal government, an agency receives a whole bunch of grants, applications. Those grants are evaluated by a person or multiple people. Those grants get a score, the scores are tabulated, determines the funding. The artificial intelligence, what Watson can do is actually read the requirements for the grant, read the responses, learn by ingesting massive amounts of data from past responses, from past grants, and make determinations whether the reviewers got it right or not, based on that information. And that information could come in the form of a text, it could come in the form of a document, it's unstructured data, and it could pull that information out and it can learn from that. We're doing that today with IBM. So it's being able to sort of analyze images and text, not just data. It's also the natural language processing. It's able to ingest lots of data, massive amounts of data, and then start to make decisions off of that. I'm actually going to show you a video here that talks about what this is. It's an explainer video. It's IBM, so I know it's our partner. It doesn't have to be IBM. Artificial intelligence isn't owned by IBM or Watson, but it's our partner on this, and it's a powerful story that they tell. Now, I will say that getting the amounts of data that you need for the systems to learn is a challenge, especially in areas where we're not necessarily collecting lots of data today. So that's one of the drawbacks of it. But where you can find historical data or massive amounts of data, it's very, very powerful. The other thing that I want you to think about as you watch this presentation, and it struck me, was the systems learn and act almost like they were social workers looking at the data and the problem like you might look at a client. So the way it thinks will actually be very similar to how you think, if that's your kind of your core perspective. So as you go through this, take a listen. We have sound?
IBM's Watson is at the forefront of a new era of computing, cognitive computing. It's a radically new kind of computing, very different from the programmable systems that preceded it, as different as those systems were from the tabulating machines of a century ago. Conventional computing solutions, based on mathematical principles that emanate from the 1940s, are programmed based on rules and logic intended to derive mathematically precise answers, often following a rigid decision tree approach. But with today's wealth of big data and the need for more complex, evidence-based decisions, such a rigid approach often breaks or fails to keep up with available information. Cognitive computing enables people to create a profoundly new kind of value, finding answers and insights locked away in volumes of data, Whether we consider a doctor diagnosing a patient, a wealth manager advising a client on their retirement portfolio, or even a chef creating a new recipe, they need new approaches to put into context the volume of information they deal with on a daily basis in order to derive value from it. This process serves to enhance human expertise. Watson and its cognitive capabilities mirror some of the key cognitive elements of human expertise. Systems that reason about problems like a human does. When we as humans seek to understand something and to make a decision, we go through 4 key steps. First, we observe visible phenomena and bodies of evidence. Second, we draw on what we know to interpret what we're seeing, to generate hypotheses about what it means. Third, we evaluate which hypotheses are right or wrong. Finally, we decide, choosing the option that seems best and acting accordingly. Just as humans become experts by going through the process of observation, evaluation, and decision-making, cognitive systems like Watson use similar processes to reason about the information they read. Watson can also do this at massive speed and scale. So how does Watson do it? Unlike conventional approaches to computing, which can only handle neatly organized structured data, such as what is stored in a database, Watson can understand unstructured data, which is 80% of data today, all of the information that is produced primarily by humans for other humans to consume. This includes everything from literature, articles, research reports, to blogs, posts, and tweets. While structured data is governed by well-defined fields that contain well-specified information, Watson relies on natural language, which is governed by rules of grammar, context, and culture. It's implicit, ambiguous, complex, and a challenge to process. While all human language is difficult to parse, certain idioms can be particularly challenging. In English, for instance, we can feel blue because it's raining cats and dogs, while we're filling in a form someone asked us to fill out. When it comes to text, Watson doesn't just look for keyword matches or synonyms like a search engine. It actually reads and interprets text like a person. It does this by breaking down a sentence grammatically, relationally, and structurally, discerning meaning from the semantics of the written material. Watson understands context. This is very different than simple speech recognition, which is how a computer translates human speech into a set of words. Watson tries to understand the real intent of the user's language and uses that understanding to possibly extract logical responses and draw inferences to potential answers through a broad array of linguistic models and algorithms. When Watson goes to work in a particular field, it learns the language, the jargon, and the mode of thought of that domain. Take the term cancer, for instance. There are many different types of cancer, and each type has different symptoms and treatments. However, those symptoms can also be associated with diseases other than cancer. Treatments can have side effects and affect people differently depending on many factors. Watson evaluates standard of care practices and thousands of pages of literature that capture the best science in the field. And from all of that, Watson identifies the therapies that offer the best choices for the doctor to consider in their treatment of the patient. With the guidance of human experts, Watson collects the knowledge required to have literacy in a particular domain, what's called a corpus of knowledge. Collecting a corpus starts with loading the relevant body of literature into Watson. Building the corpus also requires some human intervention to cull through the information and discard anything that is out of date, poorly regarded, or immaterial to the problem domain. We refer to this as curating the content. Next, the data is pre-processed by Watson, building indices and other metadata that make working with that content more efficient. This is known as ingestion. At this time, Watson may also create a knowledge graph to assist in answering more precise questions. Now that Watson has ingested the corpus, it needs to be trained by a human expert to learn how to interpret the information. To learn the best possible responses and acquire the ability to find patterns, Watson partners with experts who train it in using an approach called machine learning. An expert will upload training data into Watson in the form of question-answer pairs that serve as ground truth. This doesn't give Watson explicit answers for every question it will receive, but rather teaches it the linguistic patterns of meaning in the domain. Once Watson has been trained on QA pairs, it continues to learn through ongoing interaction. Interactions between users and Watson are periodically reviewed by experts and fed back into the system to help Watson better interpret information. Likewise, as new information is published, Watson is updated so that it's constantly adapting to shifts in knowledge and linguistic interpretation in any given field. Watson is now ready to respond to questions about highly complex situations and quickly provide a range of potential responses and recommendations that are backed by evidence. It's also prepared to identify new insights or patterns locked away in information. From metallurgists looking for new alloys to researchers looking to develop more effective drugs, human experts are using Watson to uncover new possibilities in data and make better evidence-based decisions. Across all of these different applications, there is a common approach that Watson follows. After identifying parts of speech in a question or inquiry, it generates hypotheses. Watson then looks for evidence to support or refute the hypotheses. It scores each passage based on statistical modeling for each piece of evidence, known as weighted evidence scores. Watson estimates its confidence based on how high the response is rated during evidence scoring and ranking. In essence, Watson is able to run analytics against a body of data to glean insights, which Watson can turn into inspirations, allowing human experts to make better and more informed decisions. Across an organization, Watson scales and democratizes expertise by surfacing accurate responses and answers to an inquiry or question. Watson also accelerates expertise by surfacing a set of possibilities from a large body of data, saving valuable time. Today, Watson is revolutionizing the way we make decisions, become experts, and share expertise in fields as diverse as law, medicine, and even cooking. Further, Watson is discovering and offering answers and patterns we hadn't known existed faster than any person or group of people ever could, in ways that make a material difference every day. Most important of all, Watson learns, adapts, and keeps getting smarter. It actually gains value with age by learning from its interactions with us and from its own successes and failures, just like we do. So, now that you know how it works, how do these ideas inspire how you work? How can Watson make you a better expert? What will you do with Watson?
I grew up in the 80s. I saw the movie The Terminator. Anyone see that movie? Mm-hmm. All right. Where the computer takes over all the defense systems, creates this big nuclear war, and then there's machines, and they come back in time, and it gets a little crazy. But so I first heard about this as kind of my thought. But I think what I really want to think about how I think about it as it relates to what we do, and how I think it can be helpful for you to start to think about it is, when we were solving these management problems, we were thinking inside a box. We were thinking inside a box that basically said, we have data, we can move that data, we can share that data, we can track that data. We were inside a box, though, that did not contemplate learning from that data, having a system that could answer questions that we didn't necessarily even think about we knew today, but we might want to know answers to down the road. We didn't think about that data as we were thinking about a transportation system, not a learning system. And if we step back and we think about where systems are going in the future, it's down this path. It's down this path of understanding and asking an entirely different set of questions to solve an entirely new set, not a new set of problems, but a different set of problems. So for example, we have a demo that we do, and these are some of the questions that we ask Watson in the demo. And you actually sit there and you ask Watson, you ask the computer, and it says, wait, why is the Greater Eastern Organization and Development Corporation on the list of at-risk profiles? And some of the data sources that we have in the system is all the audit data for all the organizations for anybody that gets federal money around the country. And so Watson can parse through that and say and identify based on real language, learning the language data, it can identify this is at risk because they have qualified opinions on their audits. And it can identify that coming out of the system. At the same time, it has the potential to identify other sources that say, well, while it's got those audits, it also got this award. And it can pull in social media data and other data to support that initiative so you can find and it can learn things. If a grants office at the federal government wanted to do this research, it would never happen. this kind of information in return that you get just by having access to data and have it to be able to search things. We didn't have to tell the system to go find award data, that this person won an award. The system identified that winning an award was a good thing, identified that as what it needs to be pulled out, and then pulled that information out. You can find social media data. So you have the ability to look and identify potential challenges or problems that exist by incorporating social media data into your worldview and into the view of what information you get coming out of the system. It starts to find, you ask the questions and it finds ways to answer them that you might not necessarily think about based on the data that it has accessible to you. When we're talking about management systems, you have to identify the type of data you want before you can do anything with it. With this, you don't. Find, someone that might get, why a grant might get denied is because someone's on a list that maybe we didn't know about because they got a new job there, and there's some other source that tells this person that's got a new job and this person's on a do not fund list for some reason. And that information can be identified through a variety of different payroll records and tax records and the like that are publicly accessible. So there's a huge amount of information that's out there relative to that. My original plan for today was to break you back into your groups and try to apply this artificial intelligence concept to your problem. But because of our time limit here, what I'd like to do is do two things. One is, does anybody have any examples or thoughts about how this AI could impact what they do today? Or is this just like blown your minds and we're not there, which is fine. I'm just interested if there's any direct solutions, either with the solution that you were looking at earlier or another problem that you might have where this could come into play or how this could be helpful. Yeah.
This system works with trying to find, we work with marginalized women.
Okay.
Most of them are single moms. And we're trying to find appropriate training for them that would be the most productive. Would this system work for something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example of how, it's a different example, but it relates to that question. So one of the things that we aren't doing yet with this, but we want to do, is the federal government funds, say your department in the federal government, you fund, 100 cities around the country for a program. And you think all those grants are good and those are all the right places to put the money. But what if there's a better place to put the money? What if there's a better match between your money and based on your type of money you're giving out and the type of money that could be most successful? So you could analyze things in this example. It's a different example, so the data points are a little different, but the concept's the same, right? So Watson could analyze all the different cities that did really well on that grant historically. What other cities have similar types of demographics to that city that aren't getting the money today? What other cities maybe have the challenges at the same or a deeper level that need more help than the cities that you're looking at now? What other cities have, maybe there's even an agency within that city you want to give the money to. Is there an agency within that city that has good audit scores, that has good people, a lot of good social media buzz about it, maybe got an award or whatever? So Watson, if you said, is there another place that would be we would get more value from the dollars that we're allocating, because where else could we allocate the money? It could analyze 100,000 cities or agencies and make that decision. It's a similar concept, right? We have these kinds of people based on this one individual's demographic characteristics. We see this kind of success. The challenge will be getting enough data in the system to be able, so it can start to learn based on that, right? So you'd have to have enough information on what programs were successful for that population, for that individual within that population,
So the agency would need to have massive amount of data. Is that
I'm saying the country would have to have massive amounts of data that would be in a publicly accessible database that would allow you to pull that in so that the agency could use that data to make analysis based on that information. No one agency is going to have enough information. But if that program, part of what we started with way back at the beginning was the amount of data that's available now compared to at any other point in the world, the history of the world, right? All of that data is available. If you can get that data into Watson or into a system, an AI system, it can start to analyze that data in ways like we're talking about that maybe no one else is thinking about, but then you start to ask it that question, and then it starts to look at that, sees the trend, sees the pattern, sees and identifies that, and starts to be able to give you predictive answers, not just guesses.
Would you have to know, would I have to know the terminology that's being used across the country?
You would have, you would have to know the terminology that was the terminology to a certain point, not necessarily. Watson can interpret language differences, okay, like we talked about here. There would have to be an initiative, though, probably by a type of organization. So again, it's not happening next month, this isn't happening next year, but over time, to your point, it's a perfect example of how this could be used to be helpful. It would just have to have access to that data. Now, a lot of that data is probably publicly available if there's federal money funding that initiative. So then it's a matter of how do you access it, how do you get it, and how do you start to learn from it? But the answer is yes, you could start to map that kind of question. Yeah.
I think about the ideas about diagnosing and looking at all the symptoms. I'm wondering about treatment, if this could be used for not just medical treatment, but the types of clinical interventions that might be most appropriate based on someone's patterns and history and symptoms and, behaviors, things like that.
Yeah, I think, so I'll give you an example that's not Watson related. There's a company called Assurex, which is out of Columbus. One of our investors invested in them as well. And they provide, they do DNA mapping to determine which antipsychotic medication works best for each individual based on a DNA map. And I think they just went public because they're doing great because their stuff is amazing in terms of the value. Assurex, Assurex. So that's a non-big data artificial intelligence, but the concept's the same, right? Which is if you have enough information that there's trends based on certain demographics, certain characteristics that start to indicate that certain treatments, certain medications, certain components have a better effect or less side effects or better outcomes, all of that can start to be, because what we want to do, right, is take this out of your agency and now start to look at what we're talking about isn't a sample size of 100 or 1,000, it's sample sizes of hundreds of thousands of units, and start to be able to plug that in and start to be able to learn from that on a whole variety of levels of data analysis and structures. Yeah.
So given the fact that $650 billion is going out every year by the federal government,
yeah.
What are the odds, or I'll just even take in my lifetime, I guess, that the federal government would invest in creating this system and creating these pools of information and collaborating with IBM? And to what extent is that going on at all now? You mentioned your partnership, but I'm just curious.
So there's sort of two different initiatives, right? One is we are selling this to the federal government today. So we're building a product. It's called Grants Management as a Service. It's a version of our product called Amplifund Insights, cleverly AI for grants. But the concept is taking our system, which is a data collection, data management, data transportation system, throwing artificial intelligence and predictive analytics on top of it, looking at that and tying all sorts of data elements today that are relevant to grants in any way, shape, or form. It could be educational, national education data, national health data, audit data, social media data, all that stuff's being fed in, and that's making decisions. Now, one side of the conversation is, will the federal government use Watson kind of globally just to manage all of their data? The answer to that's probably no. There's just too many competing interests to ever do something like that. And I'm not even saying that Watson is the best thing to do that. So maybe it is, maybe it's not. But from that standpoint, that's an interesting question. I think what I am part of is I am part of something called the Data Foundation and the Data Coalition. I'm a board member of that group in DC, which is focused on, was focused originally on passing a piece of legislation called the Data Act, which was actually the Digital Accountability Transparency Act, because they put act twice because it's in the acronym and in the word, but it's the Data Act. And that piece of legislation talked about all federal spending becoming open, available, and transparent. And we talked earlier about blockchain and how blockchain is becoming a bigger push at the federal government. All of this is about trying to get federal data, public data, more transparent and accessible. Because the flip side to your conversation is the federal government doesn't have to buy it for Watson to get access to it. The data just has to be available. So it's not so much about the federal government buying Watson to do this. It's about if you had a problem and the data was available, could we use artificial intelligence to solve the problem? And the answer to that is yes. And so the initiative is more about how do we get the right pieces of data more accessible so that systems like artificial intelligence, big data systems can take advantage of that and help people make better decisions about stuff. Now, the flip side of that conversation is, the web does this in a huge way. Direct marketing companies do this in a huge way. There's a whole commercial side to that data that becomes a little bit of a conversation, right? Because you don't want to just make everything accessible and you guys triple the amount of junk email you get, triple the amount of junk phone calls you get, because now everybody has more information about you that can find more ways to target you to get the things that they think you want to buy bought. The commercial market's been doing this for years. The trick now is how do we take this into the social service market, and how do we start to learn from that and enhance that? So, they've been using artificial intelligence in the commercial side, Watson and this stuff, 5 years. We're just now having this conversation on the public benefit side. Yeah?
A while ago, you mentioned that a while ago, you mentioned that you were doing something in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about what?
We were working to, Puerto Rico was looking to purchase our system as a grants management system for the island to manage all the grants, federal grants, and all the money that came into the island and help all the different institutions in the island manage their money. Then they got hit by Hurricane Irma, which was minor and caused about a week delay in the process, and then they got hit by Hurricane Maria, which basically destroyed their infrastructure. So our conversations have shifted now to helping them secure funding from different federal agencies the best we can. So working with HHS and other groups at the federal government to help them get resources. And then at the same time, setting up the system and infrastructure to hopefully manage their emergency management money and their HUD money that's going to be coming in, the CDBG disaster recovery money and the FEMA money that's going to be coming into the island to help them have an infrastructure so that they can manage what will probably be about $20 billion through that process.
Is there big person, little voice, I don't know. There are a couple of questions. Will we be able to access information out of curiosity about what you find? And forgotten the other question.
In terms of
the name of this.
The name of our initiative, or?
Yes.
So the name of our product is Amplifund, so that's what we'd be working on. We partner with a disaster recovery firm, a firm that specializes in doing the on-the-ground verification work and setting up the policy infrastructure for the government. We just are the systems infrastructure, so we manage that. I don't know that there's a single name that kind of overarches the whole initiative. Again, we don't have that deal, so it's not a done deal. I should probably not even be talking about it, but I think it's important. I think what's happened down there is awful, and I think from a personal standpoint, you know, our company's committed to doing whatever we can to support the island and get them moving in the right direction, because it's just so irregardless of whether, you know, what I can tell you we're doing right now is we're helping them identify, find federal money, help them get that down there. If they do contract with us to help manage the infrastructure, because they don't have an infrastructure today, to help manage the money and the disbursements, that would be very helpful, I think, as well. There are, I do have a link to a website if anybody wants to personally figure out how they want to help down there. I have some information on that too. I can send out along. The request was to send the deck out, so I'll send that deck out as well from that standpoint. I may have to break the link to our internal system on it, but other than that, I'll send the link out. I'll send the deck out.
We got about 3 minutes, I think, before we wrap.
Okay. So first of all, I'm happy. If you're going to the reception, I'm going to be there tonight. I'm even more fun after I have a beer, so I've been told. So if you want to come hang out and chat more about all this stuff, I think I'd be really excited to. I'm really happy we were able to have this conversation. I hope at the minimum you got some tools that will help you manage your technology infrastructures and make you think about questions in a different way. At the most, I hope that you got that plus potentially new ways to think about building and implementing systems, new ways to think about problems that exist within your organizations and how to solve them. But it's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm excited to be part of this event and a part of, obviously, CASE, Western Reserve, and I want to thank Marianne for talking me into this and then making sure I hit all of these different benchmarks to get my presentation done on time. So I really appreciate that. And hopefully you guys had a good time as well. I am interested in feedback. We have evaluations. If there's ways that you think this could be improved, because I'd like to maybe do this again for the school or for different groups, I'd really appreciate that so that I can continue to improve it. I know I'm great, but not perfect. So we're going to kind of work in that way.
On that note, does everybody have a form? Okay.
All right. So from that perspective, thank you all for your time and your attention. 3 hours is a bit to sit through anything, so I do appreciate your energy and your responsiveness today. So thank you so much.
Adam, thank you. And again, let me echo the same thanks for all of you, those of you who have been here all day at 2 CEU sessions. For those of you who are getting CEUs, pick those up, please, out at the registrar. We hope that you've enjoyed the sessions today. You've perhaps been piqued to think about some questions that most of us haven't been thinking about. We are going to have the next event over at the Mandel School in the Nobles Commons, which will be celebrating those alums who have been chosen this year to receive our alumni awards and go into our Hall of Achievement. As a last act of this group, I don't know about you, but Adam showed so much light, I feel like the need to put on my sunglasses. We're gonna take a group picture of this group in our sunglasses.